Welcome to the East Asia by Rhoads Murphey Chapter Summary Podcast at the Historian's Eye. Please subscribe, and if you'd like to be notified when new episodes appear, click the bell icon. Chapter 18, China 1901 through 1925. End of an Empire and Search for a New Order. Section 1. The Qing New Policies. Cixi and the New Policies. Empress Dowager Cixi was greatly influenced by the outcome of the Boxer Rebellion. Her new policies were not innovative, but the entire government backed them. 1900 to 1910 was a period when many innovations were implemented. There was a variety of new policies. Some tightened government control. The examination system was eliminated and a school system was put in its place. The new policies reform was patterned after the Meiji reforms. Why? Japan had defeated China, thus the reforms were admired. But Japan and China were very different. Some of the problems. New policies cost money and thus meant higher taxes. When reforms slowed, some found fault with the government. Some were calling for a republic. The rise of Chinese nationalism. The Chinese experience of nationalism was a very different interpretation from that of other countries. Foreign influence was a smaller factor and considered unimportant. China had no sense of nationality. Confucianism was in fact transnational. As a celestial empire, rivals were non-existent, so there was nothing against which to define Chinese nationalism. The Manchus became the first targets of anti-foreign hostility. They were blamed for allowing the defeat of China. Yet the Manchu rulers were staunch defenders of all things Chinese. Nationalistic feelings began in the treaty ports. There, Chinese were continually subjected to arrogant foreigners. The treaty ports were also the source of new ideas and refuge for those who criticized the government. The United States passed the Oriental Exclusion Acts from 1882 to 1905 and became the targets of Chinese nationalists. American goods were boycotted. Students held mass meetings. Overseas Chinese. In the 1800s, many more Chinese went abroad. Most were from South China. Colonies had already been established in the Philippines, Java, Vietnam, and Malaya. The so-called coolie trade saw many taking menial jobs overseas. After 1849, many went to California. Later, others worked on the Transcontinental Railroad. The Chinese Exclusion Acts passed from 1882 were a result of American prejudice. These experiences fostered growing feelings of nationalism. Those Chinese who had been successful abroad were largely ignored by the Chinese government and thus only felt more loyal to revolutionary groups. Also, overseas, Chinese had more freedom to take part in groups banned in China. The triads gained membership among Chinese abroad all over the world. The last years of the Qing. Zhang Zhidong and Liu Kunyi presented the Dowager Empress Cixi with a list of reforms. These included phasing out the examination system and putting in place a school system. The schools were unpopular. Instead, mission schools and higher education institutions were popular. Missions campaigned against foot binding. There was little success at first. However, in the mission schools, more was possible. Many went to Japan for a higher education, including Lu Xun, who lived from 1881 to 1936, and was the greatest modern Chinese writer. Yan Fu, from 1853 to 1921, on the other hand, looked to the west. He was influenced by Russian literature and the writings of John Stuart Mill and others. Yan also became convinced that nationalism was key. Yet China was large and even more decentralized after the 1860s. Regional leaders became more powerful, as did the provincial armies. At the same time, the treaty ports also had a centrifugal influence. Section 2. Constitutionalism and Revolution. Sichi sent missions to study Western and Japanese constitutions in 1905. The next step was a creation of provincial and national assemblies, and finally a constitutional monarchy. Her death in 1908 returned power to the arch-conservative Manchu princes. She designated Puyi as the next emperor. The court allowed the convening of a national assembly in 1910. In 1911, a cabinet was formed. By this time, the Qing regime was virtually obsolete. Growing animosity towards foreigners arose from foreign control of railroads. Only foreign interests profited. In 1911, Beijing tried to nationalize all railroads, but the provincial groups distrusted the move. Sichuan stopped its revenue payments. Government forces moved to put down the rebellion. Sichuan was large and had been mostly free of foreign influence. Japan sheltered Kang Yue, Liang Qichao, and Sun Yat-sen, who would be influential in the revolution to come. Section 3. Sun Yat-sen in 1911. Sun was born in 1866 and educated in Hawaii. He took a medical degree in Hong Kong in 1892. Unable to practice in Macau, Sun turned to reform. In many ways, Sun was more Western than Chinese. He founded the Revived China Society in 1894. He had to flee to Hawaii, the mainland United States, and to London. Based in Tokyo, Sun set out to form a new program. His three principles of the people were nationalism, democracy, and livelihood. All three terms were vague. Sun joined Huang Xing. Together they formed the Tongmen Hui. This was one of the other anti-Qing movements of the time. Japan was forced to expel Sun, who went to Hanoi until the French forced him out. October 10, 1911, the First Chinese Revolution. A revolt began among the soldiers of the Wuchang garrison. The Qing officials fled. Most of the army joined the revolution. Sun was overseas and read of the event in the newspaper. He was invited to take over the role of president. His future wife, Song Qingling, was studying at Wesleyan College. The rebellion brought down Manchu rule and brought an end to the imperial system. Enter Yuan Shikai. The Qing had called on Yang Shikai to become prime minister of the new government. He formed a cabinet and issued a new constitution. The Tongming Hui were only 4 out of the 10 members of the cabinet. Yuan was unwilling to share power. Political parties emerged, some with secret societies. Among the parties was Kuomintang, or their GMD, also called the National People's Party, under Song Chao-chen. The elections of 1913 gave a parliamentary majority to the GMD. Song was assassinated. Yuan lost favor because of this, taking money from foreign powers in exchange for concessions and accepting Japan's 21 demands. Sun, Huang, and others fled to Japan. Yuan's reaction was to dissolve parliament and silence critics. In 1915, the 21 demands were incorporated into a treaty with Japan. Demonstrations, strikes, and boycotts of Japanese goods followed. It is possible that Yuan had no choice. Yuan went further in 1915, pushing for imperial office. Yuan died of a stroke in 1916, and return to the political past was now impossible. Section 4. The Warlords. Warlords dominated the period 1916 to 1928. The size of the country was reduced. Tibet and Outer Mongolia gained independence. Manchuria was under Japanese dominance. Xinjiang saw Russian influence increase. In China proper, regional military leaders controlled their own armies. Beijing continued to represent the country abroad. The southern Chinese parliament representatives resigned over Yuan's growing power. Sun returned to Guangzhou in 1917 and formed a government. In August 1917, Beijing declared war on Germany. Loans from Japan were used to build an army under a Sino-Japanese military alliance. Factions split Beijing, like the GMD. Most Chinese had trouble understanding the situations. Warlords were splitting the country. Feng Yuxiang dominated the northwest with his National People's Army. Zhang Julin allied with the Japanese and ruled in Manchuria. Wu Peifu dominated the central Yangtze Valley. All claimed to serve the Chinese people, but caused great destruction. Shifting alliances and rivalries marked the period. The economy suffered from outright damage and from general chaos. The high taxes levied by the warlords pushed many peasants into more lucrative opium poppy farming. The Yellow River dikes were neglected, causing major floods in the 1920s. Section 5. New Social Mobility and the New Cultural Movement. Social hierarchies broke down. Some that moved into power were simple opportunists. Others found opportunity working for warlords. Women found new opportunities in the treaty ports. Textile work offered wage labor. A new independence emerged. Student protests followed the low status given to the Chinese at Versailles in 1919. Beijing University was the center of much of the unrest. In many ways, students took over the role previously played by the gentry in China. Increasingly, students were educated in the United States or in Western-styled universities in China. Students looked for solutions to the myriad problems China faced. Cao Yangpei assembled a group of students in 1917. Qing Duxi was among them, editing a magazine called New Youth. Hu Shi advocated what he called everyday speech. Other journals, including New Dawn and New China, appeared in 1919. Lu Chun. In 1918, Lu published The Diary of a Madman. In it, he describes the ideas of a deranged man who equates Confucian morality with a system in which the powerful prey on others. In My Old Home, he is concerned with his fate as well as others in their crumbling society. In many of his works, he writes of the plight of women. The New Year's Sacrifice describes an unnamed woman driven crazy by her difficult circumstances. Her interlocutor, the narrator, had no solution to her problems. The character IQ figures in many writings. He is a peasant, but stands for China. IQ is defeated, but hides behind his superior morality. In Lu Chun's writings, the Chinese are to blame for their predicament. He did not see a solution in either democracy or communism, and he died of consumption in 1936. Section 6. The May 4th Movement. The protests of May 4th, 1919 were part of a larger Chinese background. Hu Shi's work was important in the naming of the movement, the New Cultural Movement. Nationalism became a powerful force, largely in opposition to dealings with Japan. After secret negotiations between Beijing and foreign powers gave Japan control in Shandong, the students protested. 3,000 students met in Tiananmen Square before the Imperial Palace. The meeting led to a student union that continued protest. Students pushed for a boycott of Japanese imports. Sun Yat-sen supported the movement. Schools and colleges were closed down around the country. Students were arrested in large numbers, many women among them. The cabinet resigned. Beijing refused to sign the Treaty of Versailles. The revolution continued. Hundreds of journals emerged, spreading the ferment. John Dewey and Bertrand Russell visited, bringing new ideas. Confucianism was attacked from all sides. Hu Shi, Long Chichao, and others tried to revive the philosophy of Mozi and other early ideas. Hu Shi supported a pragmatic rather than programmatic approach to problems. The ideas were reasonable but resonated neither with the warlords or most Chinese. The ideas of the intellectuals did not reach most Chinese. The warlord era was nevertheless a period of improved infrastructure. Section 7. Russia and the building of a party organization. In the end, the liberalism of the May 4th revolutionaries had no outlet. The Russian Revolution took place in 1917. Russia had resembled China in many ways. The anti-imperialistic rhetoric of Russian communists appealed to many Chinese. Also, Lenin, boding well for China and its peasantry, had organized a huge peasant population in Russia. New Youth began to publish articles on Marxism in 1919, leading to study groups. A group in Changsha was led by Mao Zedong, who lived 1893 to 1976. The Chinese Communist Party was founded in Shanghai in 1921. Yet the GMD stood in the way of the Communist Party. Sun Yat-sen had also looked to the Russian example as a way of organizing the Chinese. He decided to ally with the Comintern. He sent Chiang Kai-shek to Moscow. In turn, the Comintern sent advisors, especially Michael Borodin. It was agreed that the GMD would be the main force of the revolution. GMD cells were established. Sun did not accept the tenets of Marx or Lenin. However, he liked the organizational methods. Chiang Kai-shek returned from Russia and established the Wampao Military Academy in 1925. There, Zhou Enlai represented the communists. An army was built to combat the warlords. Sun Yat-sen died in 1925, and a new nationalist government was created at Guangzhou. Chiang Kai-shek took over for Sun in many ways. He turned the GMD to a reactionary force, aimed mostly at eliminating the communists. He established a national government in Nanjing.